reporting, CNN obtains, I should say, more than 2,300 of Mark Meadows' texts. He communicates with members of the Trump family, from Ivanka to Don Jr., White House officials, Rudy Giuliani, and more than 40 current and former Republican lawmakers. CNN special correspondent Jamie Gangel is back with me, and also joining the conversation, CNN's MJ Lee and Ryan Nobles. So, Jamie, you showed us at the beginning of the show texts from Republican lawmakers, and as I said, even some family members telling Mark Meadows he needed to convince the president to do something. Now we're going to dive into another crucial period, which is after the election, way before January 6th.
Right. So I want to point one thing out, and that is about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Mm-hmm. We showed how on January 6th she was alarmed by this. I just want people to go to CNN.com. They will see her other texts there, including one on January 17th, where she is calling for the president to invoke martial law.
Right.
This is something, as our colleague Marshall Cohen, who's been covering the trial, has pointed out, she doesn't remember. It's there. It's in the text. The other thing you see, many times Mark Meadows doesn't reply to people, but there's someone who didn't respond to him. And that is Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger, who they are pressuring to try to come up. We've all heard the phone call. Can you come up with more votes? And I'll read you two more. This is on November 19th. They're pressuring Georgia, Mark Meadows, to Raffensperger, quote, "Mr. Secretary, Mark Meadows here. If you could give me a brief call at your convenience, thank you." Then on the 5th, "Mr. Secretary, can you call the White House switchboard? Your voicemail is full." My understanding from looking at the reporting is Raffensperger did not respond. We don't see it in the text there. But I just want to say, looking at these texts, big picture, this is not a normal way for a White House chief of staff to be communicating. This, it sounds a lot more like a campaign manager. And just to underscore, December 1, their Attorney General Bill Barr says no widespread election fraud. They keep going.
And let's be clear, it was a conversation that Mark Meadows wanted to have, that President Trump eventually did have, in order to get the Georgia Republicans to find Donald Trump more votes in order to overturn the Georgia election.
That's right. And, you know, it's so just incredible, the sheer volume of the text messages that you now have access to and the public can now see. It is just incredible to see that even the people who were closest to Donald Trump, some of his most fervent supporters, the idea that at some moments these people, even as they were throwing around these conspiracy theories and trying to figure out, is there some way that we can sell the public on this idea that this election was rigged, that it was fraudulent, there are moments where you see real doubt sort of creep in as these people are having these conversations. I think so many people that tune into coverage about January 6th and the election, they sort of wonder out loud, how is it possible that so many people around the president, surely these are smart people, people who must know better, how is it that they ended up being so complicit? And you get a real picture of that from these text messages.
Complicit, I mean, what about your reporting on Mike Lee?
Right.
That's the ultimate in complicit.
Well, and what the texts all laid out show us, right? The reason that Mark Meadows is so important to the January 6th investigation. He is the nexus between all these different factions of Republicans and conservative-leaning people that wanted to prevent the certification of the election results. He had a foot in Congress as a former member of Congress. He had a foot in the campaign, directly involved in talking to Bill Stepien and other people that were involved in the campaign, Jason Miller. And then, of course, he was the White House Chief of Staff. So that meant a direct line to the president and to members of his family. And getting back to your point about these members of Congress that were actively involved in this, and to your point, MJ, you know, Senator Mike Lee was for it until he was against it. Right up until the very end, was pushing this idea that there was a way to prevent the certification of the election. It didn't end up happening, but that is in large part why so much anger was on display on January 6th.
And
because people believed it could happen.
And you missed one group of people, conservative talk show host
That's right,
on
right,
another
right.
network.
Right.
Sean Hannity, tell us about those texts.
So Sean Hannity is actually one of the people Meadows texts with the most. There are more than 80 text exchanges. It starts right on election day. What's interesting is that Sean Hannity both seems to give advice, and he's a well-known friend of the president, but he also seems to take some direction from Meadows. This is on election day. Sean Hannity, hey, North Carolina gonna be okay. Meadows, stress every vote matters. Get out and vote on radio. Hannity has a radio show. Hannity replies, yes, sir, on it. Any place in particular we need a push. Meadows, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona. Hannity, yep. Meadows, Nevada. Hannity, got it. Everywhere. I just want to add, there are a lot of reporters in these texts, as you would expect, because they reach out to the chief of staff. There are other Fox hosts, there are CNN reporters, reporters from the New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, NBC, but there is nothing like these texts between
Let's
Sean
be clear,
Hannity
that
and
is
Meadows.
not normal. That is not normal for people who don't know how we communicate. It is not normal for somebody who works for a purported news organization, despite the fact that he is clearly not a journalist and doesn't even really purport to be. That's not okay.
That's not normal. And Dana, the equivalent would be Ron Klain, who is President Biden's chief of
Yeah.
staff, texting you nonstop to say, hey, President Biden would love it if you talked about this on your show on Sunday this weekend, and you going ahead and doing it. Can I just quickly note one thing that really stood out from Jamie's excellent reporting? This idea that these text messages appear to act as an echo chamber affirming Trump's false claims that the election was stolen. I just think that someone like Mark Meadows was being constantly inundated, as these text messages show, even at moments when he had doubts about the strategic, whether it was a good strategy, whether this was worth doing. He's just getting bombarded over and over again by people around
But
the
to your
president.
point, what's interesting about that, even though he does seem to be kind of the repository for all the crazy ideas that everyone in the conservative ecosphere had as it related to this, at no point does he ever push back and say, this is a bad idea.
Correct.
He talks about it maybe from a strategy standpoint. I don't know if that's the best course of action that we should take, but at no point does Mark Meadows stand up as a leader, as one of the most powerful people in the country at that time, and say, no, there's no there there. We need to move on. We need to transition. We need to figure out the next steps. He fully is complicit in all of this from the very start.
No, it's so important. Such fantastic reporting. Feels like we are just on the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to look at and to go through, which I know you've done already, but we'll hear more about it later. Thanks to both of you for your excellent reporting as well.